Justin Trudeau says he's done in a week. The court says proroguing the government was okay. Tariffs causing anxiety for Canadians. Doug Ford to charge 25% tariff on electricity to Americans. And the Japanese banks bail on Carney's net zero alliance. And close to 150,000 small businesses lost in COVID. All that and more on The Really Big Show. With me, Ian Burns, our managing editor in Ottawa. Beautiful day here in Kelowna. How's it looking in Ottawa?
It's actually nice here as well. Very sunny. I mean, it's a little bit cool, but I think it's just over zero and very bright and sunny. So it could be worse.
There you go. We got lots to go on here, but Justin Trudeau, the leader of Canada for the past 10 years, in a Holly Doan's Black Luck story, the headline there says it done in a week. And yesterday confirmed he resigned next week. Trudeau rejected repeated appeals or claims by Donald Trump saying that he was scheming to remain in office by, like managing a trade war here. And then he says he looked forward to a transition to his duly elected successor in the coming days or week. And said Trudeau, emphasizing the singular week, the Liberal Party will elect a successor on Sunday. Yeah, that election takes place on Sunday. Well, it's actually been taking place all along. They close it off here right away. And then the reporter asked, are you considering taking up some kind of caretaker role? And including staying on, and he said, no, I will not be. And then we got a clip here from Justin Trudeau, his emotional video from him yesterday.
On a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
A lot of that all over the internet. People are using that clip there a lot. He was definitely emotional in that clip. Any thoughts on that?
Well, he's got us, hasn't he? That's the thing. We have to be very grateful that he's got us. He's got our backs. I mean, particularly independent journalism. He's really got our backs, hasn't he? The way that he's taken away our main revenue source and then given taxpayers' money to our rivals. I really appreciate him very much for that because he's got us. Or let's say you were somebody that was a little bit concerned that the government had become too authoritarian in 2022, and you went to Ottawa to protest, as is your right in a democracy. I mean, he's got them, hasn't he? He got them. He had their backs. Good old Justin. Thanks so much, mate.
And I think a lot of people that's all going on the internet too, and that says you've got our backs already. I'm just trying to figure out how to take the knife out of it. So
the thing is, I mean, obviously we jest, we have a bit of banter, don't we? But the bottom line is to look at this as like objectively as possible. You shouldn't speak like that when you are an extremely polarizing, controversial prime minister. He's not a prime minister that is led in a way where he's tried to bring everybody together and sort of satisfy every constituency within this country. He's not that guy. He's somebody that is governed for one side specifically, and he's put sides against each other. Now, that happens from time to time. Many leaders throughout history are famous for doing that. And later, when time passes, he might be looked upon fondly, as they have in the past, as other leaders have. But the reality is, he's not a guy who can get up there and cry and say that he's helped everybody, because that's not been what his tenure has been about. His tenure has been extremely divisive, revolutionary, lots of changes, and it's been backing certain groups against certain other groups. So don't get the tears out now and pretend that you've been a prime minister for everybody in Canada. Nobody thinks that. That's why you're leaving now. That's why everybody's sick of you, because the divisiveness has ultimately backfired, and the blowback is him leaving.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the thing on the Democrats too, from Democrats saying that the party has kind of like denigrated into a party of fear and trying to stoke fear. And I would say that Justin Trudeau is, even his own former deputy prime minister accused him of the same thing of, virtue signaling and identity politics and wasting 10 years where, like instead of, building on Canada's wealth, and that's the biggest thing, and that's why we're facing all these hurdles right now with one main customer, and we're in this really bad spot.
Yeah, but I just think that it's incumbent upon him to at least try to be honest. It's, honesty is obviously it's rather rare in politics, isn't it? So let's make an effort, try at least to be a little bit more honest and not
Well,
put on this fake show and pretend that you care about everybody. Because really, if you sat him down when he wasn't in tears and you got him in a serious mood, he would admit that himself, I'm certain. He hasn't been there for all Canadians. That's not what he's been about. That's not what his political career has been about. He's been there for some Canadians, certain groups that he likes.
and then media for sure is one of those things that is like the facts show it. I mean, we can pull up stock charts of some of the media outlets, and they've selectively chosen which media outlets to help and which ones to cripple, and that's what has happened to us. We're the ones that have been not chosen for help, but we have been chosen to be crippled by their policies.
And that's his time as prime minister in microcosm, isn't it? It's every single one of their major policies. There's always been a loser and a winner. That's what that's what it's been about. He's gone around and he's carved Canadian society into twos and threes and fours and more. And some of them have been winners and some of them have been losers. That's basically everything. And you go back to all of his big sort of policies. Carbon tax is another one, obviously. The carbon tax, the whole point of the carbon tax is we're going to take money off these people and give it to these ones. That's how he would sell it, in the dying days of the carbon tax. Just pure like redistribution. And that has been the case with pretty much everything in his whole time in office, And I would say the best example of that is the COVID protests in Ottawa, where we have to remember, it's so easy to forget now, isn't it? Even though it was just a few years ago. But we have to remember that he breached the COVID restrictions, at least in spirit, to go out and join in a Black Lives Matter protest. And he was even asked by a reporter who said, "How come you did that? But then, you wouldn't go to another protest?" And he just came out very candidly, almost like naively, and just said, "Because this is a cause that I support." It's like, okay, because that's who he is. That's what Justin Trudeau represents. He is a guy that supports some causes and works against others. He is not the prime minister for all people that he seems to think he is.
Many economists are calling this the lost decade for Canada, and it's definitely driven a lot of Canadians, divided them, and the party has run on a lot of fear and divisiveness for sure. And it's been kind of a lot of businesses. We're going to get to this later. A lot of businesses have folded or suffered under this Liberal government, and a lot of them really benefited. If you're in the green field, I mean, that's the ones that protect this government a lot. Is because they benefited a lot from a lot of like grants and funding and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and obviously, if you were of a certain political persuasion, and you could submit a bid for federal funding that had all of the magic words that the Liberal Party decided that it likes, diversity and whatever, you fill in the blanks here. They did really well too. And you can look on the federal government's website at the grants that they give out. If you just have a certain number of magic words in there, the money is yours basically, and times have never been better. But they're on the flip side, a great many people and companies have not benefited from taxpayers' largesse in that way.
That, and then he prorogued government, and there was a legal challenge to that, and there was a decision that just came down from Federal Court Chief Justice Paul Crampton, and said that he did not exceed his authority in suspending the legislature. And I think a lot of us felt there was not going to be much from that, like there was not going to be an order back to Parliament.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, cast your eyes on the Conservatives. Look at the Conservative Party. What are they promising on this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They're not even talking about this. They're talking about Mark Carney today, as usual.
Yeah.
They're not actually coming out and saying, this has been a disaster for democracy. Like, elect us to a majority in Parliament, and we'll change this. We'll do everything we can to change this. You know, as big as it takes, even right to the top of the Canadian Constitution, we will change this so that you can't just prorogue Parliament willy-nilly when you're in trouble.
You can change that slow,
Alas, the
Rommel.
Conservatives have not said that. And then you ask yourself, why? You innocently come and ask the question, why wouldn't the Conservatives change this? The answer is because they want to do it too, and they will. Because it's one of those loopholes. Effectively, it's a loophole that the political parties, the political class in Canada absolutely loves, because it can get you out of a very deep hole. And that's just the sad reality of it, really.
Yeah, and then this is really causing a lot of anxiety for Canadians. You know, like the tariffs on, the tariffs off, and then, you know, like people worried about their jobs, worried about the cost of living, worried about a recession, all kinds of stuff, causing a lot of stress and anxiety for many Canadians and for a lot of Americans as well, right?
Definitely. And I mean, all you have to do, if you want to sort of, it's just numbers, but look at the Dow Jones over the last month, down 2,000 points. That's like, you know, it's just, you're looking at a screen and you're looking at numbers, but the reality is that represents possibly millions of sob stories and little mini tragedies going on around the world, because Donald Trump has shredded the global economy and the US economy. He's violently attacking his own economy because he's got 19th century ideas about economics and has surrounded himself with servants that are too afraid to tell him that. But I mean, this story is actually kind of sad, because it's a lot of people that don't actually, they're not really that familiar with economics. They're not familiar with you know, international trade and US politics. They don't really understand any of it. And well, I mean, that's maybe a bit patronizing, but they're not like nerds. They're not obsessives. They're not like, they don't spend their lives. I can tell when I look at the interviews that the CBC's done. They're not spending their lives in the political world, because there's only a very small percentage of people who are sad enough to do that, including us. But I almost feel like it's not fair, really, because it's like they're very scared, because they're hearing from people like Chrystia Freeland talking about nuclear weapons and the US invading Canada and things like that, and then they're listening to David Eby, who's, you know, saying that the relationship with the United States will never be the same again. Like, and then Doug Ford saying that he's gonna, like, you know, we're gonna go in there and cut their electricity. It's like, no wonder they're afraid, because the
Yeah.
language that's being used is extraordinary. And if you don't have a deep understanding of what's going on, you don't realize that a lot of this is just brinkmanship and sort of an alternative to negotiation, then yeah, I'm not surprised that you would experience anxiety, because it sounds very scary. If you get all your news from the CBC and CTV and you just hear little snippets from David Eby and Trudeau and so on, yeah, bloody hell, you would be terrified, wouldn't you? Because then you lack the context.
Yeah. Well, we took to the streets here in Kelowna and we asked some people what they thought of it.
First, the tariffs are coming, then they're suspended, then they're implemented, and now we're hearing more changes could be coming. How have people been staying on top of the news?
I try to keep, I mean, it's a circus, unfortunately. Even from the last time he was president, I try to stay away from it, but I mean, it's hard to not see something on social media, something popping up, but I don't know. It's disappointing. I think there's no need for it, but it's just kind of more like being a bully.
I've been watching the news regularly and just, trying to, it's very confusing. They're on, they're off, but yeah, I have been for sure.
Do you think it's important to stay on top and informed?
Oh,
about
absolutely.
It?
Yeah.
Why so?
And I think that it also, we should, as Canadians, understand what's going on so that we can better inform ourselves about what we can do individually to, support Canada in all of this.
It's pretty hard to do, but oh yeah, every morning I look to see what today's news is, especially with the tariffs. It's like there's a madman loose.
And why have you been trying to stay on top?
I have a daughter who lives in Texas.
Okay.
And I like to travel. I've got grandchildren in Texas.
Yeah.
And it makes it harder to visit them. And It makes me question if I really want to go to Texas anymore.
Have you been trying to stay on top of the news and what's with the latest?
Yes, I have.
And why so?
Well, of course, it affects all of us in a very profound way because we're so dependent on trade. So I have that kind of interest.
Does a trade war worry you?
Absolutely.
And how come?
Well, it is a sign that we're no longer such good friends with the United States. I think it's a very unfriendly thing to do. And
There you go. That was the reaction on the Kelowna streets there, which is, I think, mirrored across Canada. A lot of people just have a lot of anxiety over like the off again, on again. I think that's the biggest thing, right?
Yeah, I think they were actually they were very well informed, I would say, more than the average sort of people that you yank off the street. But they all
Well,
basically had the right approach, didn't they? I
they're
would say.
likely watching Kelowna now. So where we try to give
That's
a
it.
more balanced perspective instead of driving fear into the hearts of people.
That's it. That's the answer. That's why, the average Kelowna you know, citizen is clearly a cut above.
Yeah. Out in Ontario, though, Doug Ford says that he is going to put that tariff on electricity on Monday. And he says effective Monday, he will impose a 25% surcharge on hydroelectricity exported to the Great Lakes states. And then all blame, he says, rests squarely on Donald Trump. And he said that in an American television honest interview. He said all Canadians love Americans, but it's one person, that's Donald Trump, who's creating this chaos. And it's not. And he said it's a shame that we have to put a tariff on the electricity. But as of Monday, this Monday, we're putting a 25% tariff on electricity to 1.5 million homes and businesses in those 3 states. And Ford says it really bothers him to do that. He said he loves Americans. He says that over and over again, and loves the United States, but it's a mess created by Trump. And he said the rest of the world is watching us.
A very very dangerous game he's playing now, isn't he?
Yep.
I mean, we'll have to see what comes of that, because that is quite that's quite an escalation, isn't it?
Yeah, because like again, British Columbia gets electricity from Washington, and then our pipeline to the east goes to the United States. So energy, they're playing with energy. Energy is a tough one. Energy is a human necessity, right? It is one of the tougher things, right? And we've seen that in Canada with the carbon tax, where we've been taxing energy like it was a luxury when it's like a basic human necessity, and we've seen what it's done to our economy.
Yeah, well, I mean, in British Columbia is so blessed with its energy options. LNG, hydro in abundance, probably some other stuff in there, but those are the 2 main ones. And yet has voluntarily, the province has chosen voluntarily to sabotage itself and refuse to use fossil fuels. At least that are produced in BC or burned in BC. So, I mean, it's just complacency, isn't it? I think the leaders of British Columbia just thought that something like this could never happen. Like it was always just going to be smooth sailing, and they thought that they could indulge in luxurious fads like extreme environmentalism, and it would be fine, and the lights would still turn on. But there's no guarantee that that's going to happen, and that's why you always have to think about the future, don't you? And that's why, as a citizen, it's your responsibility to try and elect people who are wise and provident and not stupid and wasteful as the leaders of British Columbia have been over the last God knows how long.
Well, jumping on Ford's thing there, Bay Street bigwig David Rosenberg. I mean, he really wants to he wants to burn down their house. He says Canada has a lot more leverage than people seem to realize. And he said, if somebody comes and bullies you in the schoolyard and gives you a black eye, you don't punch back, you go burn down their house. Now that's a guy that says he wants to escalate it, right? Burning down somebody's house.
I mean, he's definitely got there's definitely a good point there. Although people often like to compare everyday life as a human being with the running of a country, and often that analogy doesn't hold. But I think because that's what he was saying. He was talking about like you said, being bullied in the playground. I think that is actually pretty true as far as I'm concerned. It always seemed to serve me well. If somebody does try and have a go at you, just escalate to like, you know, 100% immediately, and usually, 99 times out of 100 they back down. But whether that works, on a country to country level is another question. But the other point that he makes here, which I think is quite important, probably the main point that he makes really, is that Trump right now is surrounded by very, very servile people, really spineless, slavish people, and not just in the Republican Party, but also the kind of toadies that he's put in to all the main cabinet positions. They're all terrified of Trump because he's at the height of his powers. He's like very popular. He's just won an election, very popular by American standards in all the main kind of opinion polls and things like that. He's riding high, and he's an extraordinarily vicious and vindictive man who doesn't think twice before cutting people down, even on his own side, so to speak. So they're all afraid. But what Rosenberg says is, if we, metaphorically speaking, burn down his house, that will kill his approval rating. The Americans won't stay with him if, if they can't afford things, if prices go up and then the Republican Party starts to be upset, then they're not, the slaves will abandon the master. And I think he's right there. So, but the only thing I would say for this is you have to make sure it's the right moment. It might be too soon to attack Trump because he is still very popular right now. But inevitably, his popularity is going to collapse. It's going to happen within the next few months. I mean, it's like a law of nature. It happens to all American presidents. So I would sort of say, wait for the opportune moment, then burn down his house, and then his slaves will start to leave him, and then that'll be the end of his power, I would say, or the end of his like this period of maximum power that he has right now.
Yeah, and I think that we've said it many, many times on this show that Canada has so much wealth now in our natural resources, and the Americans need us more than anything, especially in this new AI world. Energy is the most important thing, and Canada is like the richest resource nation in the world, especially the diversity of our assets, and I think that is our trump card per se. But we've also had a government over the past 10 years that has definitely crippled and suppressed our natural resources. And the next story we're going to talk about here, most Canadians support building a cross-country pipeline and reject adopting the US dollar. So, I mean, we've had pipelines, Northern Gateway squashed, and then, the East-West pipeline. These two pipelines could have made a huge difference in all these tariff threats, because we could have said, that's fine. Because our biggest export too, people maybe don't realize, it's energy. That's our biggest export.
Yeah, just good old-fashioned crude oil.
Yeah, LNG,
That's
crude
it,
oil,
yeah.
all of that stuff. That's our biggest export, and if we can get to outside markets and we sell our energy at a discount because we have one customer. I mean, if you look at what the prices of our crude is versus what the world oil is, there's always a discount to it, right? Western Canadian Select is always at a discount to crude oil.
Yeah, well, it's a real shame. I mean, it's a shame on so many levels, isn't it? It's not just that we didn't build the pipelines and the ports and whatnot to get it over to Asia and Europe, or at least in bigger numbers. The problem is also like the lack of refineries, because they do a lot of that in the Gulf, don't the Gulf of America, we should say now. They refine it down there, don't they? And there's so much about it. It's like it's a very special kind of oil as well, isn't it? It's like a very sort of sludgy oil. It's not like the sweet Saudi crude or whatever. It needs very specific treatment to turn it into gas. And the Americans have all that infrastructure. We don't really have all that much of it, which is so dumb. I mean, the word dumb just keeps coming up again and again and again when it comes to Canada's energy policy, doesn't it? But I mean, it's also dumb from the Americans, I would say, when because there's only one other country in the world really that produces oil like Alberta's in any kind of significant quantity, and that's Venezuela, which is completely frozen out. I mean, they don't even have the capacity to export their oil now. They're in an absolute shambles. So the Americans have been really stupid here as well, or Trump has been stupid. But yeah, I mean, it's just been so many years, hasn't it? it just, again, it's a painful topic. You know, I was at the museum, the National Science Museum, not so long ago, and there's a really good exhibit there. If anyone's ever in Ottawa and interested, I would really recommend you go. But there's like a whole section devoted, like a whole room devoted to energy, and there's a real, like a big section just about oil, and there's lots of like artifacts from the 1970s, like posters and things like that, and they're all talking about the same things, the 1970s. So that's like 50 years ago. They were still having this exact conversation about oil. And then here, you know, when is it ever going to change?
Yeah, it's we got a really cool meme at the end here if you stick around for it. Another Holly Doan's Blacklock story here. 131,000 small businesses lost through the pandemic, according to the Department of Industry. This new data follows evidence at the time that one business group took suicide calls from desperate shopkeepers. And it was the small businesses that really took the brunt of it, because a lot of the big box stores were allowed to be open, but many of the small businesses were shut down. Lots of businesses that I know of really took a hit. We took a hit as well. We didn't qualify for a lot of the stuff that went on. If you wanted to get that BDC loan, you had to put up personal guarantees, and we were not in thinking that it was something out of our control that we would actually put up our personal guarantees for a loan at a time when you didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah. Well, the bigger companies as well can afford all the lawyers and all of the you know, insurance people and all the rest of that sort of class of people that
Yeah,
exist to go and beg money off the federal government. You know,
yeah
like big companies have entire departments full of people whose only purpose in life is to beg the government for taxpayers' money, and they usually succeed. Obviously, little companies don't even know where to begin to try and get money off the federal government. So they were at an immediate disadvantage in that sense.
many of the big box stores or operators did extremely well during COVID. You know, they saw their stock shoot up, and where a lot of small businesses basically lost their business, or like a lot of them were really like suffered from a lot of mental depression too. And sales dropped off cliff. They weren't allowed to be open, and even in Kelowna here in our service industry, it was a horrible time. You talk about anxiety, about you can open, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it was just horrible. And then add to that the wildfires that continue to hurt the tourism industry.
It's a very good time for Amazon, though, wasn't it? A lot of the big
Yeah,
American companies.
good time for many big box stores. Especially when you saw that all the big stores were left open, including the chain restaurants, right? The McDonald's and all that kind of stuff. They had less restrictions, and many mom and pop restaurants definitely not allowed to be open, or had definitely different restrictions put on them.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that the same rules could apply to a massive international company and a mom and pops is ludicrous from the get-go, isn't it? As if they have the same kind of resources to be able to comply. I think, well, but this is just one tiny little thing that was done so wrong and so stupidly during that
Well, we
period.
we
I
seen
mean,
it we saw it just recently too with the GST holiday that they did. Many small businesses didn't have the capacity to change their like their register systems and all that. And it's just almost impossible for them to do it, and they couldn't participate in that, and it just actually caused them more pain than it was any good for them, right? But the big box stores, they just had to put a piece of code in there, right?
exactly, yeah. I mean, they have full-time workers who were probably doing very little at the time and just gave it to them. That was their task. But like small businesses are on a knife edge a lot of the time. They don't have that kind of capacity.
Yeah. Well, here's some good news from David Eby. I guess it's not from ICBC. So eligible policyholders will get $110 back. So instead of that $1,000, which they took off the table, you're not getting that $1,000 grocery rebate that was promised in the election that he said you would get immediately. That's been taken away. But ICBC is going to give you $110 back.
Nice. That's just a little bit over 10% of the $1,000 rebate that
Yeah.
everybody was promised.
But it's your money. You actually overpaid for insurance, so you're just getting some of it back. It's not like, again, when people say they get taxes back, you're just getting some of your money back, right? It's not like the government's giving you money.
Yeah, but that $1,000 was a rebate, wasn't it? Supposedly, so that's supposed to be money that given back to you.
So there's lots of activity in South African farmers there, and Trump says that he's going to offer South African farmers a path to U.S. citizenship. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one. I don't know if you can remember, but he said similar sort of stuff in his first term as well, because the South African political scene is very, very frightening. It's very, very scary. If you ever listen to any sort of South African ANC, the ANC is like supposed to be the party of government, like Mandela's party, but it's full of cranks and nutcases and racists and horrible people. But then there's another party which is like the third party, I think, the Economic Freedom Party, or Economic Freedom Fighters, maybe they call themselves. That's like a pretty major party, and it is just unambiguously racist, like as racist as it's possible to be, really. And they despise white people. And white people, well, when you see Trump here say farmers, like, I think it's still true that the majority of at least farm ownership in South Africa, it's the whites, it's the descendants of the Dutch and British, settlers in South Africa, and they haven't had a great time in South Africa. Well, to be honest, nobody's really had a good time in South Africa for a very long time, but it's broken through to the mainstream, I think, in America, that the economic freedom fighters and some factions within the ANC are very racist. I should say, not just towards whites. They also really don't like people from Zimbabwe and other parts of Africa, but they want the land. They want to take the farmland away from white South Africans, and it's a lot of people are really scared in South Africa. So, but for him, it's like it's a free win, really, because you get if he can steal these productive citizens from South Africa, they'll come in, and because they speak English in the vast majority of cases, they'll come in and they'll go and settle in Iowa or somewhere like that and farm. It's like that's a victory for the Americans, but it obviously comes at a cost of doing a lot of damage to the relationship with South Africa. So it's a win and a loss, really.
And in that truth that he put out there, he also made a threat to the Russians as well because of their increased pounding of Ukraine recently.
Yeah, which is an interesting one. And the Russians have already responded and said they're not going to stop doing anything because they're winning. So it doesn't seem to have had an effect yet. I mean, the Americans are already sanctioning Russia pretty much
I was going to
to
say,
the
like,
max,
I don't know what
really.
other sanctions they can do. But again, our government here has been purchasing Russian oil. So we're funding the Ukrainians and at the same time funding the Russians, which is, seems to be like the definition of lunacy.
I mean, with Donald Trump here, I think it's safe to say, don't think that it's some kind of like indication of malice or some sort of conspiracy or that he's got some secret plan. I would say at this point, based on how he's handled just the Canada trade relationship, just as one example, based on that, I would say he has very, very little idea what he's doing. I think he's making it up as he goes along, and that's why it's so chaotic and stupid on the face of it. I think he really is he's just winging it.
Yeah, no different than Justin Trudeau in the virtue signal that Chrystia Freeland accuses him of. I think Donald Trump may have too much of a love for that black felt marker that he uses every day. Like it's almost like a king doing decrees every day, right?
Yeah, and he loves to throw them out there, doesn't he? Like throwing pennies to the peasants from the balcony in the castle or something like that.
Reminds me of the old French king or something like that, with Louis or something, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the Liberal leadership. There you go. I think today's the last day to get verified to vote. I think you can go back one slide there, Rommel, if you didn't put it in. But anyway, today's the last day to get, no, it's the next one there. You get verified before 5 p.m. Eastern time to get verified so you can cast your ballot. And they will pick a winner here on Sunday.
Oh, I wonder who it'll be.
Yeah.
No idea who it's going to be. It's going to be a real surprise, I'm sure.
And if we put up the poly markets thing there a few times, and poly markets basically are showing that I think it's like a 98% or 96% Carney, with very
Yeah,
little
it
for.
would be the upset of the century, I think, if anybody but Carney won.
You know, I actually logged on last night and I watched Chrystia Freeland's town hall because I thought I'd ask the question on Bill C-18, but like they really weren't taking questions, and I stayed in there for about an hour, and it was just three people talking, and just nothing really that is of substance about where Canada's going. They were talking about Ukraine for the most part, and obviously not answering any of the questions that were being put out there, and you couldn't chat or nothing in there, so everything was basically all shut down. So again, the Liberals have been really good at talking at you, not talking with you.
Well, they're a lot more comfortable in that situation, aren't they? And this is seen across the world. Liberal parties across the Western world and left-wing parties across the whole Western world. They're very they're going through a bit of a rough patch right now, I think, ideologically, and they find it very hard to be scrutinized, which is why they invent nonsense and say that their opponents are extremists or whatever, because that's just the easiest way for them to not to avoid scrutiny, essentially. So I think this is something very interesting, I'd say, and worth your time is to look at Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's a left-winger, a Democrat. He's decided for some reason to start a podcast, and the first person that he interviewed was like a real Trumpy servant,
Charlie
a
Kirk.
proper,
Yeah.
proper big Trump guy. He's actually quite articulate, unlike a lot of the servants of Donald Trump. But he is still 100% loyal slave to Donald Trump, so don't expect any surprises there. But they have a conversation, and it's actually very interesting because that comes up, and Gavin Newsom seems pretty sort of willing to learn about on that. He's willing to listen because it's just so obviously true, isn't it? It's transparently obvious that the left and the liberal parties, particularly the ones in power, have tried to insulate themselves from their citizens because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the criticism. But then the position from people like this Charlie Kirk guy is you've got to, because if you don't, then you're just going to keep losing elections, which generally speaking, I think is true.
I think Newsom, because he terms out here, he has aspirations to be, the Democratic candidate for the presidency in the next election. And, like one of the questions that was asked of him by Charlie Kirk was where he stands on transgenders playing in female sports. And he kind of said that it's not fair, but he didn't really come up with a solid answer. And then, of course, a lot of Democrats have been losing their minds on him, and a lot of the publications, left-leaning publications, have went after him for it too.
Well, that's ironic, isn't it? Because that was one of the topics of conversation, was how the left hunts down people because they're so purist. They're such purists that they hunt down anybody that says anything against the law of the day or the hour, because it changes so frequently. And it's quite ironic that exact thing occurred when they discussed that.
And and the violence that they're willing to do too, as well. I mean, there was a bunch of them, with the paddles at the address, the congressional address, and then there was also there's a bunch of Democrats that are doing some kind of fight stance. There's a TikTok out there where they're all getting ready to fight, and then if you look at Elon Musk as one of their targets, I think now there's 4 or 5 dealerships that have been shot up, tried to be burnt down, taken over. And supercharger stations, they definitely are. They use a lot of violence, and then these are the same people that scream about January 6th, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's how long now has this been true? It's another one of those things, isn't it? It just lingers on forever.
Yeah. So here you go. We got a little clip here from CBC on Mark Carney.
Different setting than it was at the beginning of the race, partly because the Liberal support in the polls has come up so much since then. Only, I think, partially because of the race itself, but maybe partly in that, but mostly as a result of events south of the border. So, it's they've got a little bit of a different strut in their step, perhaps. Mark Carney has not had a great race, if you ask me. He's not exactly set hearts on fire. There's been a few questions raised about his veracity. But it's hard to see anybody else winning at this point. I hate to just thump home the conventional wisdom, but that sure seems like the case. I think the other thing is, I think there was a lot of talk that, as soon as he gets in, he'll want to go straight to the election. I'm not so sure that's the case for a couple of reasons. One is, I think if you're him, you surely would rather be seen to be governing for a bit. You'd rather be putting together a cabinet, meeting Parliament, etc. And I think you can do so now. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. But I'm getting signals from the NDP that they're not quite as keen as on voting no confidence anytime soon. That may have something to do with them being down at 10% in the polls.
Yeah,
but
yes.
I don't think it's a given that the minute they meet Parliament that they're going down, and maybe rightly so. And if we're right in the middle of an April 2nd next round of tariffs.
There you go. And then we have some reaction from Pierre Poilievre as well. Not that one, no.
He's not saying very much, is he, Pierre? Very quiet.
Did you have that one? There you go. You have that one, Rommel, or not? Just wait a second here. We can pass on it if you don't have it. That's okay, Rommel. We'll move on. Yeah, you can go on the internet and you can find. Oh no, what's going on here, Rommel?
Imagine Donald Trump leveraging Mark Carney's multi-million-dollar investments in the United States against Canada's interests. How is it possible for Mark Carney to stand up for Canadian jobs when he's already moved jobs from our country to New York? How is it possible for him to support Canadian pipelines that might compete with his foreign energy investments? How is it possible for him to support Canadian energy independence when he has already invested millions of dollars in American coal? The answer is not possible. His financial interests run against our national interest and put us in an incredibly weak position in confronting President Trump. And make no mistake, the US president will take advantage of that weakness. I should also add that Liberals want to use this crisis to make you forget. To make you forget they've been in power for 10 years and 3 terms, that they are seeking a 4th term in office. And they want you to forget that they are the ones that doubled housing costs, doubled food bank lineups, doubled our national debt, drove $500 billion from Canada to the US, and made us weak in the face of our American counterparts. What we need is a Prime Minister who will bring home our jobs and money and put Canada first, and that is what I will do.
There you go.
I mean, my immediate reaction to that, as with so much of what Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives say, is, all right then, so you've told me I shouldn't vote for the Liberals, and that's a long list of reasons, but why should I vote for you? And I think a lot of critics within the party, within the Conservative movement, are raising that with Poilievre. You can't just spend 95% of your day attacking the Liberals and individuals in the Liberal Party. You have to give people a reason to want to vote for you. And that's why Poilievre got popular in the first place, because he offered something to people. Back in the day when he used to talk about housing all the time and, the Canadian dream, and it was all about that, really. But then I think they learned, in a sort of Pavlovian style, they learned that if you just hit Trudeau again and again and again, your poll numbers go up. But whether that's going to happen with Mark Carney at the wheel, I don't really know. But I wonder very much about that strategy.
Yeah, so MP Dr. Leslie Lewis put out this tweet here, and it's just more on that Net Zero Alliance. That Mark Carney chaired this Net Zero Alliance with all the banks that were all part of this, and they basically, they wouldn't fund things that didn't meet climate goals, and most of the American banks left, and the Canadian banks left, and now we see Japanese banks leaving as well. This is after, like I said, the Wall Street and Canadian banks leaving. But if you go read Mark Carney's platform, in the climate area there, he says that he will mandate the Canadian banks back into the carbon taxes.
Interesting. I mean, good luck with that.
The Liberals love that
Good
word,
luck
mandate.
mandating
Hey,
everything.
hey, the Liberals love that word, mandate, and existential. Those two words. If you could put those in the same sentence, wow, you got something, right?
You need some existential mandates. But I would say something that, like, and I'm not going to try and claim to be the first person to realize this. Other people have mentioned it, but so, two things are happening at the same time. One is we're being told that we need to effectively reindustrialize so that we can give, so that we can have a military again, pretty much. All right, in a
Yep.
nutshell, it's linked to Russia, it's linked to Ukraine, but the bottom line is we need a military. To have a military, you need to reindustrialize because you can't rely on other people to make your tanks and bullets, etc. Okay, so there's what, on the one hand, we're being told that by the same people, I should add, and then on the other hand, we're being told net zero, everything powered by wind turbines and solar panels, and so on and so on. Those two things are incompatible, and I'm glad that I'm not the only person that's seen this. There are quite a lot of people who've noticed this. But is that not absolutely the most obvious thing in the history of the world? How can you reindustrialize and remilitarize and do it with solar panels? Solar panels and wind turbines and net zero do not allow you to be an industrial power. It's not possible to do it with that unless you do nuclear. But nobody's talking about massive amounts of nuclear. So it's kind of why are we being told two things that contradict each other by the same people? That's the question that we should be asking.
Yeah, no, it's all about energy. It's all about energy. And again, Canadian energy is all beneath our feet there, whether it's LNG and our oil and gas or uranium stockpiles that are in Saskatchewan. And wind and solar are a blend of it as well. But it's all about energy. And if you look at some of the nations that have done extremely well in building massive cities and massive projects, you can look to China and you can look to Saudi Arabia. And China has used every form of energy it can get its hands on, whether that's burning coal. They have the largest solar farms in the world, but they still use like a lot of nuclear reactors, SMRs. Like they are building their whole like cities up, and what they've done in China is just unbelievable. What they've done in a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean they do have quite a lot of green energy there, but we shouldn't fool ourselves. I mean the spine of their power system is coal, and
Yeah.
then as you said, like they'll use everything, and they do have quite a lot of hydropower as well. But the Chinese, the industrial revolution in China was basically powered by coal, and it's still being powered by coal. They have no plans to get rid of coal because we've shipped off all of our manufacturing in the West, just about. We've shipped it off to the Chinese, and the Chinese are no suckers. They're no fools. They realized that if they were going to have all this industrial capacity, they were going to need coal. They were going to need fossil fuels because that's the most reliable form of energy that we've stumbled upon as a species. So, I mean, the idea that we're going to take all this back, that's why at least, say what you want about Donald Trump, at least he's consistent because he says, let's reindustrialize America on the one hand, and then he says, drill, baby, drill on the other hand. Okay, they live
They
together,
go
those
together. They
ideas.
go together. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
So,
consistent.
yeah. So here's the thing. Here's the jewel of Canada, and people don't realize this, I don't think, and I can't say it enough. Alberta and Saskatchewan, I'll put in there. Those two provinces, cattle, crude, and code. And why I say code, cattle, because it's a great cattle country, right? I mean, some of the best beef comes out of Alberta beef, and we've all heard the songs Alberta beef. And then crude oil. It's one of the leading spots in the world. Like they're in the top reserves in the world. And the second part is code. And why I say code is because it's going to become like this center for AI centers because of the climate, because it's cooler. These AI computers generate a ton of heat. So putting data centers in the north makes a lot of sense. And they have access to cheap energy, LNG, which is something they can get going right away, right? Like a lot of these companies in the States are going for SMRs, but they take time to build, right? They take time even to get 3 Mile Island going again. Those things take time. LNG factories or LNG power plants, you can get going in a matter of like 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that it doesn't begin with C. I don't think I can think of a synonym that begins with C, so it's not going to go in there. But the other thing that they have in Alberta is lots of flat land and lots of
Yeah.
land.
Like,
So
easy
that
to
just makes
develop,
life
easy
so
to
much
develop, right?
easier.
Yeah, you're not drilling
Yeah.
into the side of a mountain, and they have a government in Alberta that is conducive. There's a C for you, right?
Yeah.
Cattle, crude. There you go. Cattle, crude, and code, and a conducive government. There you go. And
Yeah.
and the climate, There you go. That's we got another C in there. Climate, because they have
Get the C's in.
a climate that is conducive to AI data centers, right? Because it's less cooling that's required. Like if you put up these data centers in say Arizona, sure you get lots of cheap solar energy, but you also have a lot of cooling problems, right? Because it's you're not only fighting the computer heat, you're fighting the heat from outside.
Yeah. And just to quickly go back to what I said, the topography is not good. It's very
Yeah.
hilly. It's not as easy. Anybody that's driven around the Western United States
Yeah.
in general knows that it gets pretty crazy, doesn't it? There's lots of mountains and hills and things. The flat part of the US is in the east.
Yeah. I've lived in northern Alberta and northern Manitoba. I lived in Thompson, Manitoba, and I've lived in high level Alberta. And you can go to the Yukon too. You can just open the doors if you want some cooling. Right? We actually, when I lived in
Yeah.
high level, our deep freeze was just basically the porch.
Well, some people in Europe have already shown us the way, haven't they? Like the Finnish and the Swedes. They were famous. I can remember like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, back when the internet was just becoming popularized for everyone. I remember reading a lot about how they had all the servers up there in countries like Finland. And it is exactly what you said, because it's cooling. You don't have to expend as much energy and effort to keep the servers cool. Because obviously, if you can't do that, then they'll just overheat and die, won't they?
Yeah, and then we talk about the Chinese for a second. Their Belt and Road Initiative, they're building ports, railways, power plants across 150 countries. Well, we're still, like arguing about whether we should use our oil and gas or whether, like Karina Gold says, we should cripple it and not allow it, landlock it, not even allow it outside of Alberta. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we can learn from the Chinese. They're presented as these like enemies of our civilization and all the rest of it, as are the Russians. But and they're also patronized a lot, aren't they, by the elites in the West? They're patronized as being, pretty sort of useless and not very nice. But that's far from the truth. I mean, the reality is that there's a vast amount that the Chinese can teach
Well,
us.
yeah,
And
one
one
of
of
the
the things is that, like,
yeah.
play to your own strength. Don't be stupid. Play to your own strength.
And one of the things that's got Trump all freaked out there on the Panama Canal is basically that the Chinese went in there and they're buying up all the companies that kind of like deal with the Panama Canal, and that's what and then they started charging the American warships to cross through the Panama Canal.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've also, they've spent money in lots of natural resources in Canada as well, haven't they,
They
famously?
have.
Like
Yeah.
they're really spreading their wings.
Actually, the nickel mine that I worked at as a controller, they purchased that as well.
Because the Chinese, they know what matters, I think. They sort of seem to inhabit, at least at the higher levels, they seem to inhabit a world of functionality. They choose what works. And that's why, we can talk about their politics being ridiculous, like the Communist Party and everything, but they have kind of adapted that to practical necessity, haven't they? It's
If
like they are communist in theory, but
yeah,
really they're more like state capitalists. And they just adapt things, they make things work. And that is
yeah.
really something that we should learn from them.
If you take a look at what Canada has for natural wealth, and if you look at the natural wealth in China, like we're definitely like head and shoulders above them. But then if you look at our position and how we utilize our natural wealth, they are head and shoulders above us. If you look at what they've accomplished over the past 50 years, and if we look at what we've accomplished over the past 50 years, and especially this lost decade in as far as growing our nation and providing services, we've lost a decade for sure. And even before that, we haven't put big projects into play, right? We talk about how great we are and, like all this stuff, and it just, you just have to take a look at what's going on in the rest of the world, and then you'd say, like, what's going on? Really,
Yeah,
what's
I mean,
going
can you
on?
imagine if the Chinese had one Pacific port? Well, I know we have two in Canada that are decent, but let's just talk about Vancouver. If they had one port like that, do you think that the Chinese would voluntarily put like thousands of restrictions on it, try and block infrastructure projects that would get tradable goods to that port and so on. Like, do you think they would do something as crazy as ban oil tankers from coming into the main port? I mean, stuff like that. They would just never do that in China because because they're not dumb. They're not stupid like that. Because they know in recent Chinese history, they've had famines and they've had real poverty. They know that there's a pretty sort of thin line between wealth and poverty, and they intend to never be on the wrong side of that line ever again.
You need
So
to go look.
this is what you should learn from the Chinese.
You need to go look at a map of the world, and you can see the Chinese influence. It's like they're turning like it lights up all over the place. And there's just a couple of the highlights. They're building airports all across Asia, massive ports in Greece, high-speed rail everywhere. I mean, high-speed rail is something they could do. If we want to build that high-speed rail Trudeau's talking about, I suggest we go to China and just take a look at how they did it, because his $4 billion just to do planning, like they could probably build the railway for that.
I think that's probably accurate. Yeah, I mean, even some of the Europeans can do it a hell of a lot cheaper than it looks like we're going to do it for.
$4 billion just for planning, and that is just like, who's getting that $4 billion? SNC-Lavalin, well, a really rebranded SNC-Lavalin is in on that, as is Air Canada. Let's switch the markets though. Again, gold just kind of like, popping around there, not doing much. The stock market volatility definitely has, made gold a safer play right now. Bitcoin, again, just hanging around there too, looking for direction. And then the Canadian dollar, you could see that it perked up a bit there, but it's just kind of hanging in that side. It needs clear direction. What's going to happen with the election here, and what's going to happen with leadership, and will we get a leader that really taps our wealth? Because if we do get somebody that is pro natural resources, our dollar will take off. It'll be the bounce that you wouldn't believe. But if we get more of this suppression of our natural resources, we're headed for a recession that is going to be likely really bad for many, many Canadians.
Yeah, even the white collar people, they don't seem to realize that a lot of their wealth, if not most of it, ultimately derived from the blue collar side of things, from the resources.
Yeah. There you go. We got some market stuff here, and this is what we'll play this clip here from Scott Bessett on Squawk Box here, Treasury Secretary.
Top 10% of Americans are 40 or 50% of consumption, and that is an unstable equilibrium. The bottom 50% of working Americans have gotten killed. We are trying to address that. We're trying to get rates down, and could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure. And look, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending. The market and the economy have just become hooked. We've become addicted to this government spending.
And that's in Canada as well. Like if you look at British Columbia, for example, our growth in jobs here is the public sector, same as Canada. Our growth, a lot of it is in the public sector. And that's what he's saying there. Like all this stuff that they're doing, they're finding all this waste, and that a lot of that is funded, or a lot of the growth we've seen through COVID was all government spending. And so cutting that off may cause some pain for the stock markets initially.
Yeah, I mean, it's also important to recognize that he's saying a lot of this in the context of the tariffs and the trade war against Canada and Mexico and China.
Yep.
So he's trying to kind of, I think he's conflating two things there rather dishonestly. But then again, he is a politician, so obviously he's dishonest. But he's making a good point there about the public sector, and that is, I think that's something that a lot of rational people who voted to elect Donald Trump, they were very interested in that, because it is a rational position. It's a very it's an established economic policy to slim down the public sector and try and increase the private sector. But obviously for the last, I don't know, number of years anyway, it's been the other way around.
Yeah, and then we got another thing. We're going to play this clip here and we'll talk about it.
Meantime, Walmart considering moving its legal home from Delaware. It's according to a new report from Semaphore. The retail giant would follow Elon Musk, who left the state for Texas last year. Musk and now Mark Zuckerberg also reportedly considering a similar move potentially with Meta. Join us right now on more of this story, Liz Hoffman, who broke it, Semaphor's business and finance editor. Liz, it's great to see you this morning. This could be a biggie. I mean, Meta's already a biggie, Tesla's a biggie. And really, I think the question at this point is what you think the state legislator in Delaware wants to do about it. Or
yeah, you can cut that off there. Yeah, so that was the, like they say, Elon Musk claimed that activism, an activist judge actually caused some pain for Tesla shareholders, and that's why they wanted to move their company from Delaware. And then a lot of the other big companies are saying they would like to move from there too, because they said like some of the rules have nothing to do with how a company is supposed to operate, but more about activism.
Well, they all registered in Delaware because they offered the most favorable terms, didn't they, historically? Joe Biden stayed there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that seems to have backfired, and it's I'm sure they're actually pretty upset about that in Delaware because it was pretty important to them, I think, wasn't it, to have all of those companies registered there? I think they derived a certain amount of revenue from that. So they'll be very upset about because it's one woman, I think, isn't it? Like, and I don't think is she called a judge or is she an arbitrator or something? They have I can't remember what her title is, but it's basically like one woman. So I'm sure she's not beloved right now in Delaware.
Yeah, and then let's move on to the AI tech world. Eric Schmidt warns against an AI Manhattan project. He's the former Google CEO, right? He cautions against an aggressive AI development initiative akin to the Manhattan Project. So, like a lot of people are really scared of what's going on in AI and suggest that such a push towards super intelligent AI could destabilize global relations and provoke international retaliation. And, and he says maybe from China, but I would assume that the Chinese and the Russians are working hard at their AI. And that's the reason that nobody can really rest on their laurels as far as AI goes, because it's probably full steam ahead for everybody.
Yeah, I wonder if they do go ahead with a Manhattan Project, the Americans, I wonder if they're going to use American allies to do it like they did with that one.
Yeah,
because
Canada played a role in that one.
Indeed, and so did Britain, and then were instantly betrayed by the Americans and cut out of the program as soon as they made it work. So
Yeah,
I wonder if they've got a similar plan. I wonder if the allies are stupid enough to fall for that 2 times.
Fool me once. Yeah. So for people there, Trail BC is the where they created the heavy water that was used in those bombs that were dropped on Japan.
Yeah, and the Americans made sure to steal every single technological secret that the British had in exchange for their help, so-called, in the Second World War. Very inglorious moment in the history of America.
Apple Intelligence claiming to have some more intelligence, saying, they got some visual intelligence now. So they say you can actually use your phone and actually look at an object and it'll tell you what it is. And Image Playground, we can create some images in the new iOS. And then, ChatGPT is tied in. But Apple Intelligence definitely lagging in the word intelligence. It's probably a bold call to say that. I mean, I haven't really seen much of it. So, but anyway, in our EV segment here, Nissan claiming that this pressure to go all EV, zero emission vehicles is basically going to force them to close their plants. So the UK is loosening some of those restrictions, right? It says it's confirmed to relax electric vehicle sales quotas after Nissan claimed they were threatened the future of its Sunderland manufacturing plant. And so there'll be a substantial change in policy in the UK.
The British, like I've said to you a number of times, they have gone absolutely all in on everything net zero. They're full on religious converts, the government that's in charge right now. And I think this is because we live in the real world and not the fairy tale that they think we live in. This is going to be the first of many concessions, I would say, in that country.
Yeah, so there you go. And then in Canada, a lot of people are starting to wear this sticker because, like I said, there's been some attacks on dealerships and stuff like that. There's a lot of negativity towards Elon Musk right now, so people are putting this sticker on their vehicle. Actually, Kayla Caruana, we do a Tesla talk show, And she was actually at a Tim Hortons lineup, and some guy came up to her and started screaming at her, and she thought maybe something was wrong with her car. She rolled down the window, and the guy started screaming at her, how dare she drive that car? And she's like, what's going on? Like, she couldn't understand what was going on. And then he said that, like, she shouldn't be driving that car, she should sell it. And then she kind of caught her breath there, and she said, well, if I sell it, somebody else will be driving it, won't they? So he told her.
There's no selling south of the border, so it wouldn't make sense, economic sense.
And this is where the craziness, the lunacy goes. He said to her, if she wants to drive it, she needs to buy one of these stickers. Hey?
It doesn't take much for people to try and take control of your life, does it?
It's like, during COVID, right? Because, the government told you, like, it was that person there that wouldn't get vaccinated, that person there that wouldn't wear a mask, and then they deputized people, right? Remember, you're calling in, you're turning in your neighbors and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of these deputies are still, packing their badge around. They've just got different things they can police now. And right now, I guess they're policing Teslas.
Yeah, and I guess they'll also be happening in the grocery stores and that, won't it? People will be like, do you know that's American that you're about to buy? Why don't you take this Canadian product? Which, I would say at least that's kind of somewhat rational. But there are people that they will take any excuse, won't they, just to get into your business and tell you what to do. It's a very, very ugly trait that some people have.
I told her to tell him next time if somebody comes up to her, just like, make sure you clean the poop off your boots before you climb up on your white horse. And just tell people.
Yeah, because what she should have said was, "Are you willing to submit to a strip search right now so I can search you for American goods?"
Yeah,
so there's a reasonable chance that his pants are going to be Levi's or something like that.
Well, I would also say, let's see that phone in your pocket. I got a hammer here, and if it's an iPhone, I'm smashing it.
Yeah. Well, you need this sticker and put it right on the front of the screen that says, "I bought this before the US went crazy."
And then here's a meme that you've all been waiting for that is really kind of like suited to the conversation we've been having about climate change and the suppression of Canadian natural wealth. There you go.
Yes. As long as you accept that the word communist there, consider that to be a flexible term. Maybe authoritarian might be another option there. But yeah, quite accurate.
Which one of these two guys is Justin Trudeau in this picture here?
Well, yeah, I think he's probably the rubber duck, I would say. Not really a participant at all, just kind of looks on.
There you go. We always have humor at the end for everybody. Take it in jest, or if you're going to be, a screamer about it, maybe go into an empty room and scream there. And, maybe stop judging people so much, right? There's a once, because, you shouldn't judge people, Like I said, unless you're willing to take your phone out of your pocket, because I'm pretty sure there is no Canadian-made phones anymore, is there? BlackBerry used to be the Canadian company until they basically pooped their pants, right?
They failed to keep up with the times, didn't they?
I remember when I got my first iPhone, and then I had an 8382 at BlackBerry, which almost everybody had. Even the President of the United States had an 8380. And then, somebody was telling me that, BlackBerries had the internet on them. I'm just like, yeah, I have a BlackBerry, and it has access to the internet, but doesn't really have the internet like the iPhone does, right? And anytime you see transformational change, there's a couple things that have to happen. Cheaper, better, faster. Cheaper, better, faster. That's the words, right? And that's when things transform. And the iPhone was clearly better and faster. I don't know what the cheaper part didn't really fit into the cheaper part, but it sure delivered. Like an iPhone has more technology in it than what they launched the Apollo missions with.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Apollo missions, Elon Musk launched a SpaceX rocket, and they caught it again. They caught the booster, but they blew up the Starship.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of hardware disappeared, isn't it?
Yeah. So there you go. But they did catch the booster again, and I think the goal is to catch the Starship as well. And
well, he's also going to go up and rescue those astronauts, apparently, isn't he? So I would hope that they weren't watching that explosion.
Donald Trump, in his address to Congress there, I thought one of the things he could have done to make that moment more John F. Kennedy is, when John F. Kennedy said, we're going to the moon, right? Like that America's going to win the race to the moon. he could have asked Robert F. Kennedy to join him up there and then talk about going to Mars instead of, he just kind of like, as an afterthought, we're going to Mars. But it would have been fitting to have the nephew of JFK stand up there and make the announcement, because JFK, that's a very famous announcement there where, America won that space race to the moon.
Yeah, and it represented American ambition. And it represented something to like strive for. And I think Trump has tried to kind of tap into that, hasn't he? And he is quite complimentary of John F. Kennedy. When you hear him speak about Kennedy, he obviously has a fondness for him. So it's true, he could have latched himself onto that a bit. But I think just the fact that Elon was by his side was enough, I think, to that kind of it rubbed off onto Trump, I think, that he was pro ambition and pro space.
I mean, I think that is like if they can, I mean, that's Elon's biggest goal, is to be an interplanetary species, right? I think that's his main driver for everything that he does. And then somebody here, one of the comments from Vidi there says that Starship was an expensive sky sparkler. Yes, but you're going to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. So what SpaceX has been able to do, especially with Starlink and all that, is nothing short of like world leading, and it's crazy. A lot of airlines now running Starlink, and not in Ontario now. Doug Ford canceled this Starlink $100 million deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elon has been, if I dare say, I think with Canada, he's been a little bit foolish, I think, because all it would have taken all along for him to have preserved his reputation in Canada is for him to say something. I mean, it could even have been really vague. He could have just said, "I'm a Canadian citizen and I absolutely love Canada. I'm going to do everything I can to help Canada." Imagine if he just tweeted that. He could have done that in 30 seconds, and then at least there would have been something that he could have defended himself with something. But instead, nothing. Crickets,
And I do want
and
to.
that's obviously ruined his reputation in this country.
I do want to close off with one thing. I'm glad that you called it the Gulf of America, because we're trying to get into the White House there so we can be the next new media outlet in there, right? Because we don't get banned like AP. And then maybe if we move to the United States, and then we can run Kelowna Now News from there, and then we can actually get it on Meta. Because American news can be on the Canadian platform or on social media. American news can be so you can put American news on Facebook, but you can't put Canadian news on Facebook. Go figure, hey? That people can view in Canada. You can actually view American news on Facebook here in Canada, but you can't view Canadian news on Facebook here in Canada. Go figure.
Well, Americans can they can enjoy their Kelowna Now, can't they, on Facebook as well? It's one of those those really bizarre situations.
Well, we can't put it on there though. I guess so. So I guess like if we move to Seattle, then we could do it. I mean, we could still do the show from there, right? There you go.
I do actually think that they've blocked American news as well on Facebook. I would.
Somebody said they saw it there. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, like the main ones, CNN and all that, they're not on there. So like you get the same thing blocked in Canada.
Oh, there you go.
But definitely it's true that we can be seen.
In America, yeah.
In America, yeah.
Oh, the rest of the world, actually. Well,
the rest of the world, yeah. I mean, England, probably, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and other such flourishing democracies that make a mockery of Canada.
Well, we know that Chrystia Freeland watches. Maybe Elon Musk will watch, and he'll help us out here, and he'll say something nice about Canada.
That would be good.
Go. That's our show for the week. We'll be back Monday, and with the really big show. We do thank you for watching. We do thank you for your comments. And you can follow us on all those channels, TikTok, X, YouTube. And we have a newsletter that goes out 365 days a year before 7 a.m. And it shows up in your mailbox. You don't have to do anything. And
just open it.
Yeah, just open it. And you can visit KelownaNow.com anytime, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There you go. And with that said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.